I got Becker. I don't know why, but Pastor Dave sounds like a good name. Oh, dear Lord. Okay, as you guys know, I keep it real with you guys. I still, from time to time, talk to God, and I talk to Jesus. And Loki is the first god who will drag me to church. We've always talked about that. So, in Loki's foxy ways, some progressive Christianity just fell straight up out of the sky today. On, of all places, ex-Christian Reddit. And we spent a couple hours in church today, going around to these various progressive churches, watching this certain gentleman speak. And I mean actual progressive. There are a lot of people that will say they're progressive, but they're really progressive in, name only. They'll say something nice, they'll say what you want to hear, but they don't really live up to it. We're talking about actual progressive. And as I was watching this gentleman speak, and speaking about, he's actually has the rank of bishop, he's ordained gay clergy. And as I watched him speak for a couple hours, watched different sermons, I could see the church I would have led. As a lot of you know, I felt called by God to be a priest. The Catholic Church frowns on such things. Maybe if I had found the right clergy, maybe if I had found the right place, in another time in another place, perhaps. And Loki isn't jealous. Loki isn't that kind of god. He's a very supportive god. And he knows I'd always felt called. And I'd always felt called to enter the ministry, and I'd always, guys, never the way. I always felt called to be a priest. Now, other than the UU, where you could certainly worship all the gods in creation and you would still be good to go, I don't know of too many places where I could go become a priest and, go up and speak every week on Jesus and how do we interpret this week. And then go, oh, and by the way, Dionysus is really awesome. And have you heard the good word of Loki recently? But, as he was speaking, as he was speaking, I could see what my ministry would have looked like. I could see what my church would have looked like, because he was saying a lot of things I've always thought. And I thought, how come when I thought it was heresy, but when this guy does it, he's groundbreaking and progressive? Time and tide, what are you going to do? And he's certainly gotten his share of death threats and so forth and whatnot. Because what we're seeing is the last hurrah of certain forms of Christianity. And we're seeing progressive Christianity come forward. And we're seeing actual Christians ask hard questions about the Bible. We're seeing them reject the idea of sin. We're seeing them reject the idea of a virgin birth. We're seeing them reject the idea that Jesus floated away into space. We're seeing them reject all this, and yet they still have faith, and they're struggling to put the faith together. How do we now, with our understanding of how space works, realize that no, Jesus really didn't float off into space? He's not in orbit around the Earth or tumbling forevermore out in the galaxy somewhere, as this gentleman put it. How do they do that? How do we do that if we're still, talking to Jesus? And if Jesus didn't die for sin, and he has these compelling reasons why Jesus died, which are very interesting to me, what did he die for? And as I'm watching this and I'm thinking about what my ministry would have looked like and feeling rather sad because I don't have my own church, and I don't have a wife to cook me delicious meals, not for some sexist reason, but because she'd be a better cook than I would be. She'd probably also have to do all the home repairs too. She'd be a busy woman, but I would love her. Yeah. You know, as I'm thinking about all this, and I'm thinking about, if only I had known, if only I had known, if only God had given me a clear path of here's the day you leave your old life behind, and here's the town you go to, and this is where you will meet these people, and this is where you go into the ministry. I'd ask myself why I wasn't called away from home and called to the ministry. I would feel vague callings. I even felt them in college. But I just never was given a concrete path, you know, which is maybe why I don't have my own ministry. And I don't consider myself a Christian preacher, by the way, before you get nervous and unsubscribe. Um, what I did get were pagan gods that had much more clear and concrete paths and could say, come here, do this thing, study this, do this, work on this. And I think sometimes it's just some gods leave so much open that it's hard to walk down that path, because if you're the kind of person like me that you need hit upside the head with 2x4 to understand what a god wants, then a vague mystical calling is nice and everything, and I was certainly mystical in the Christian sense for a while. But, it was such a faint call. I need to be told, here, be at this location at 2 p.m. on this day, and you will meet the person that changes your life. I literally need it written down like that in black and white that I can't misunderstand. Loki knows that if he needs me to do something, he doesn't put in a vague suggestion. He says, this is what I want now, now. And I go, yeah! He's not that bad about it, but he'll say, hey, how about we play some games? How about we do this? How about we do that? Why don't you go look at this? Why don't you do that? He gives me clear guidance I can understand. Odin's the one that tends to make suggestions that I had to learn where Odin speak for I want this and I want it now. In fact, I want it yesterday because I'm a grumpy old man. Yeah. And, I was then wondering though, I have a channel based on dealing with pagan gods. Would there be room in that kind of ministry to speak about pagan gods other than, like I said, the UU Church? For as many times as long as I've watched videos of the UU Church, I have not seen a pagan message in their Christian service. I haven't seen the priest suddenly launch into a story of Dionysus or Hades or anyone else. I haven't seen that happen. They're usually drawing from Christian sources. It seems to me, from what my limited understanding is, that there are pagan services, but they're separate. And I'm like, well, it's not quite integration then, is it? Because it's like you're saying, well, we'll let you in, but you're having your own services. I'm like, why wouldn't you have them all together? I kind of understand separating it, treating it like apples and oranges. And yeah, it's kind of the message that, well, this is Christianity, and whatever you're doing over there, you can do in our church, but not at the same time. And I go, yep. And I thought, where would the gods be? If I ever answered this calling, if I went back and I became a priest, where would the gods be? Would I be leading some kind of pagan services in a UU church? Would I be leading Christian services in a UU church? And why am I picking on the UU church? I don't really know, other than I suppose if I was going to seminary at this age, it would probably be a good place to start. And I don't feel a calling per se, but it is certainly a sense of excitement of, ooh, imagine putting on the priestly robes. And then I think, you gotta wake up early. It's not like I could have like church at like 2 in the afternoon when I'm finally up in ambulatory and do that. So I really don't feel a serious calling to the priesthood, but it was definitely something that made me, it made me stop and think. As I've been doing lately, I don't think it's a midlife crisis or anything like that. But I've been taking everything as Lokeans do, taking everything I think I know and pulling it all apart, and then looking at all the parts that fall out and going, yep, that ain't going back together. And Lokeans, at least I do, tend to do that on a regular basis. We tear everything apart just like Loki would. And we go, yeah, that broke in half when I tore it apart. I ain't gonna be able to get that back together. And then we put it back together the best we can, and we hope nobody notices that we took it apart. And there's duct tape all around it, and we put hot glue all over it. And it's clearly repaired, but we're like, no, it was like that when I got here. Uh, exactly. And we're like that. We're like that. We tear our faith apart, even our faith in Loki. But it's kind of a thing that's good for us to do, just as progressive Christianity is tearing apart the Bible and tearing into every little nook and cranny and saying, well, this They weren't around when Jesus said pretty much of anything. That's why you can't take this and say that Jesus was a sociopath. Here's when this verse was written. Here's what it means. That's why I found it refreshing to watch this gentleman speak. We have to kind of do that with our stories as well. If you actually go over to Grimfrost, and this will probably bite me because every time I've suggested a source, they go off the rails and they do something crazy. But if you go over to Grimfrost, they will have experts, and they have the one that I have, the Viking book Odin insisted I get. The stories were malleable for them. The stories of the gods weren't set in stone. It wasn't a book of scripture. It was all oral history. And they changed as times changed. They changed as it suited the time. If the faith had stayed alive, the story we get passed down of Odin would be highly different than the ancient story of Odin, because we really don't need a testy, not all quite there war deity today. Not at a time when you could press one button and devastate a huge portion of humanity. That's not quite what we need. The story of Loki would definitely be different because we don't have the same views, hopefully, of capital punishment anymore. And they would have all changed, and we wouldn't have these stories set in stone as we have in Unchanging. The story of Segan may have changed remarkably because she would no longer be, this wife of Loki, that she had this set role because when and women had these roles, as roles of women in society have changed, her role would have changed too. But we don't see that happening in paganism. We don't see it happening in Lokeanism. We've kind of taken our Norse gods and goddesses and kind of trapped them in amber. We imagine them fighting in Ragnarok with these cute antiquated weapons. And yeah, and we imagine them fighting this almost comically simple war at a time when we have lasers that fire from space. We imagine them having well-defined gender roles, even though experts in the field would say, "Well, that isn't quite how it works." And we're not progressing. We're not progressing. We still go to the goddesses for love, and we go to the goddesses for domestic things, and we go to the goddesses for what X, Y, and Z, because that's just the way it is, and that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it will always be. Kind of like if you grew up Roman Catholic, you know the Virgin Mary. I have a Kitchen Mary up in my cabinet, actually. Cooking, cleaning, staying at home, and having children. That's what women know. I hear all the women out there going, "Arr." And we go to the men for things like hunting and fishing and, being men and doing man stuff and getting an education. Where we know that's unfair and antiquated and untrue, and that there aren't only two genders. I got yes back here. So, I think one of the things we could take as pagans away from progressive Christianity is that we're not very progressive in our faith ourselves. In fact, if anything, when people start to try to reconstruct, the first thing they do is they draw away from the modern era. They draw away from free discourse with other spiritualities, religions, what have you. They try to go back and live in yesterday when we live in today. There's my favorite pin is there's no need to pretend it's yesterday, that the gods are here with us today. We tend to draw back and to become just as conservative as the people we claim that we don't relate to, but we tend to kind of draw back only into pagan communities, only into pagan circles, and to keep away from other people. And we say, well, we have our valid reasons, but that doesn't make progression. That doesn't make progression. So that's why I've always tried to keep the channel open. Unless somebody is openly attacking my beliefs, then they have to go. But that's why I've always tried to keep the channel open to people of all faiths. It was just, it was food for thought. If we expect modern paganism to live, for example, it has to adapt with the times too. It has to become something more than, please take this the right way, Christianity the second. It has to become something more than marketing books or marketing statues or marketing X, Y, and Z. It has to become a living act of faith. The gentleman I was watching said a lovely thing that God is not a noun, God is a verb. And, it has to become something living and useful that we can put into practice in the here and now and in today's society. Maybe I'm rambling like a lunatic, but it especially applies to Loki. I was thinking today and mulling it over, and there's this tendency among Lokeans to either have Loki the victim, poor put upon Loki, and then Lokeanism is constant sorrow. And you'll run across them and their sackcloth and ashes, and Segan the victim, and sackcloth and ashes and suffering, and Fenrir the victim, and all the victims, and it's perpetual victimhood. And we will always be beset by all the heathens, and we will always be hated by humanity, and it goes on and on and on. And I'm like, this is like Catholicism but Nordic. And then you will meet the Lokeans who portray it as a excuse to be edgelords or disrupt or destroy the community. And there are certainly, unfortunately, people that follow Fenrir or Hell or something that do the same thing. But we actually have to work towards making Lokeanism, paganism, witchcraft as something that's practical and positive in our lives and builds us up into the best people we can be. Not out of a fear that if we don't, Loki will do something dreadful to us, because he won't, but because it's something good to do with our lives and something uplifting to do with our lives. So many people just default back to Christianity eventually because they think, well, that is the one true way to make meaning of my life and become the best person I can be. We don't often hear Lokians, quite frankly, myself included, talk about becoming the best person we can, talk about building skills, talk about growing, talk about something else. We tend to lean more towards Thor or Tyr or Odin for that, but we often don't talk about Loki for that. Or if we do, we get sanctimonious, because you'll run into the sanctimonious Lokians too. They know everything you're trying to teach them. They learned that years ago. They know everything. They're perfect now. They're the kind of people that are the reason you left church, let's admit it. And so we have to be careful not to become sanctimonious. And yet we do have to strive to be better people. We do have to strive to be better representatives of Loki on this planet. So, end rant and sermon for this Sunday. Welcome to the first church of Loki. I got, yeah. But, it made me think that, there's all these progressive Christians out there trying to be progressive, trying to keep their faith in Jesus, and yet be progressive and have a meaningful faith that works in this world. But we really don't see Lokeans doing the same thing. Or if we do it, we kind of do it in a kind of fast and loose. Well, I don't take the whole religion or spirituality thing seriously. And yes, baby, I walked into seriously. But, we don't take the whole spirituality thing seriously, because, religions tend to ossify, as I've often said. And you can take it serious yet still have fun. You can improve yourself yet still be happy. I'm not talking about, entering, endless drudgery to improve ourselves. You can improve yourselves by, reading articles, playing, there are tons of free games and apps out there to work on to stimulate your mind, by finally putting to rest whatever problems you have with the religion or lack thereof that you grew up in. We all came from different walks of faith. I have people commenting, well, they were Jewish or they were Muslim or, they grew up in an atheistic household. We do have to put that to rest and to look at how we were raised, and to look at, has there been any progression made and everything else. I know over on ex-Christian Reddit, for example, they actually redrafted their rules because they are not anti-theistic. Ex-Catholic, ex-Christian, ex-anything does not mean you're automatically atheist and therefore very aggressively anti-theistic, go out to destroy everything else. In fact, they said what was happening on ex-Christian, where they were losing a lot of good people because they left Christianity, but they became agnostic, or they became Jewish, or they became Buddhist, or they became Muslim, or they became pagan, or they're witches of some sort, or they're spiritualist, or they live in a house with 50 ghosts, or whatever they got going on. Or they still talk to God, but they don't consider themselves a Christian. The only reason the gentleman I was watching today calls himself a Christian because he said, frankly, he's not going to let Jerry Falwell and his ilk take over the banner of Christianity. He's not going to let hateful people that, speak, you know, badly and produce hate, be what the only example of Christianity. So he's staying in there tooth and nail and still proclaiming to be a Christian. And I was like, I like that. You have to admire that. And of course, this gentleman's gotten death threats. Um, he seems to actually be walking his walk. I've seen a lot of people claim to be progressives, but, they still have some growth to do. They still have some growth to do. There was another gentleman I really liked watching, and I really loved him, and he did all this art, and I was really growing close to him to the point where I was even going to reach out and talk to him about something he'd said once. And he's talking to this other guy, and they start making these homophobic jokes about gel and dropping the soap and har har har, and they did not say the phrase, but it was like, but no homo, bro. And I'm like, wow, you call yourself a gay ally, and yet you just made homophobic jokes about gel, which I thought you loved everybody, not people in gel though, huh? And you're going out of your way to convince yourselves you're straight and not gay, because it's really important we know you don't love each other in a gay way. It's almost like you don't like gay people after all. But you'll sell us stuff. That's interesting. So, and gay people are pretty familiar with that. They're allies up until you think they're gay, and then all of a sudden they freak out because they're not actually allies. So, that's just some food for thought. I know that was long and rambly, but that is where the spirit moved me today. So if you guys like what you see, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you later. Bye bye.